From our perspective, the only way that this fire was going to be able to evolve into the next phase of the firefighting evolution was not until the fuel could be secured on board the rig.
If the well can be sealed, the fire will become less fierce and allow the firefighting salvors a chance to get on board. If they can't get onto the rig, their chances of saving it are becoming slimmer by the minute. Meanwhile, in New Orleans, the charter jet with the second salvage team has just landed from Holland, despite Icelandic volcanoes.
Leading the news this afternoon, we're live as a cloud of volcanic ash turns Britain into a no-fly zone.
Air traffic over the UK had been shut down for 6 days. The airports opened just in time for them to take off.
We were lucky in that respect because I know that the Icelandic volcano has put air travel into a turmoil, and that had just subsided that day or the day before, really, to open up the airspaces. And in that regard, we were fortunate enough to get a charter aircraft immediately for the crew coming out of Holland.
But the Dutch team still face the 80-mile journey to Port Fourchon, where Flash Boudreau is now unloading the second truck and chasing the others.
Hello? Yeah, listen, Ray just called, and we got one truck that's kind of falling behind.
40 miles out at sea, the tender boats continue to hose down the structure of the rig, trying to cool it, desperately hoping to keep it intact until the salvage experts can work out a way to save the rig.
There's a tremendous amount of concern about the fact that this rig was not on a stable footing. Its dynamic positioning system was out.
Because it wasn't really a rig fire, you know, it was a well fire. The whole well was on fire and it was spitting out oil like crazy. You don't really know how long a rig can sustain that kind of heat.
Under the rig is burning, see?
Yep, if they blow the riser pipe, it may go.
And the only thing that was tethering it to the seabed was the riser. And in the back of our minds, we were all thinking that now if it was to rupture at the hull, now we have an uncontrolled release which could hit the underside of the rig, spray out and hit our response vessels.
Hey, Paul, come look at this. You think they steaming?
But you don't really think about that.
It's 24 hours since the rig first exploded and started a chain of events that are now hurtling towards a catastrophic disaster. While the rescuers try to find a way to save the rig, many have already given up hoping to save the missing 11 men who may have been trapped on board. Over the next few hours, the inferno on the rig intensifies.
You start hearing explosions, you hear them all through the night.
The Coast Guard refused to give up their search for the missing men.
You just keep trying. You just keep going. You give it 100%.
And the salvors fear they are fighting a losing battle.
Just listening to this rig, you were listening to a ship die.
"24 hours after the Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded 40 miles off the American coast, the second part of the salvage team reaches Port Fourchon in Louisiana. Their advance party has already closed in on the rig, where the uncontainable fire is being fed by oil coming up a pipe from the seabed.
The game plan is to get everything loaded up and then proceed out. And we'll see what we've got left when we get there. But the one issue is time. You need to shut down the gas supply as quickly as possible.
Yeah, we'll put that third one there. He said we can have that open.
If they cannot, then it's going to be a more complicated situation.
If the oil flow can be stopped, they plan to board the Deepwater Horizon and fight the fire face to face. Constant training for these salvors is vital, even though they are experienced seamen who have had to deal with the deadly dangers of offshore fires many times. Fighting fires at sea is particularly difficult.
Conventional firefighting on an oil rig or a ship, you have set goals, which you've been trained and drilled in. You try and establish fire boundaries, and you do that by simple things such as closing watertight doors and bulkheads, and cooling bulkheads, and set a boundary that the fire cannot progress past, much like a firefighter, a forest firefighter does when he digs a trench. And then you progress through the oil rig or the vessel in a way that you extinguish the fires and cool and overhaul the fires so they don't rekindle. But this particular case was everything but traditional. This was not a traditional oil rig fire. This was an uncontrolled oil well fire with incredibly intense heat, sufficient to keep the firefighters at bay until that fuel could be cut off.
Out at sea, the Coast Guard is still working relentlessly. Their helicopters by now are forced to use other rigs in the area for fuel stops so they can continue their search for the missing men.
Well, there's some rigs up here in front of us.
It's a large helicopter, but from what we can carry in the back, it's relatively small. We have at most 3 hours of time aloft before we have to refuel.
Okay, well, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little line of lights off to the right.
We're flying as close as to a half mile to a quarter mile, circling the rig, looking for survivors in the water, and also using that rig to use as a reference point.
You just keep trying. You keep trying as long as there's a possibility of them to survive. You just keep going. You give it 100%.
The Salvo's advance party of James and Joost also haven't given up hope. But the situation is about to get worse.
That back corner's gone. You start hearing explosions. You hear them all through the night. You know, you hear vessels building up steam and then blowing apart, and then you hear steel on steel, things falling down.
That crane's gone. You can see where the crane, there it is. Yeah, where the crane was. Look, there's the crane rack. It's melted.
Burning into the second night, the flames are still too big and hot for anyone to board the rig, and there is still no progress in closing off the oil flow from below. But back in Forchamps, Steve Boudreau continues to make preparations to board the rig.
The rig and everything is still on fire. You can't get on board, but everything is being phased in, you know, for a response, and it's a joint effort with everybody. Try to stop it and save it. Right now, we're trying to get our teams together in position for the attack mode. As soon as we can get the fire and everything shut down, that's when we really got to go into play.
There is still no new survivors.
Everybody has the same thing on their mind is, what about the other guys, you know, the people that we still have to be accountable for. And I think that's the most important thing, because everything else can get fixed.
The Deepwater Horizon has now been burning for almost 30 hours.
Good morning. At least 11 people are missing after an explosion on an oil rig off the coast of the American state of Louisiana. The rig, which had 126 workers in total, is burning hours after the explosion. 17 people were injured by the blast.
For the second time since the initial rig explosion, the sun rises to reveal a clearer picture, and it isn't a good one. As the world watches, the salvage team struggles to see how they can save the rig.
It's just an incredible amount of heat. And over time, that heat just structurally degrades the steel. And that was very evident when the sun came up, that there had been some serious degradation of the structural integrity of the rig. And you could actually see what used to be incredibly stout steel sagging like a clothesline. You could see steel structures that were blazing cherry red.
Feel the heat from it now.
Early in the morning, the explosions on board, they started to become more frequent, and you hear the fire roaring, and when you hear all these big steel structures falling down and collapsing, it's an overwhelming type of sound.
Back in Port Fourchon, the specialist firefighting equipment shipped from Houston has arrived.
All those boxes come, the hydraulic hoses come.
Flash Boudreau now has to get the gear onto the salvage boat, knowing time is fast running out.
We got a job to do. We have to be there. You know, people are waiting. When it all goes together good, it makes everybody, the team, look good.
You don't mind?
All the way over there by that basket.